Today is April the 27th. Will we rise from the dead? Well, let's find out together as we study Mark chapter 12. So in Mark chapter 12, beginning in verse 18, Jesus is on Tuesday in Jerusalem, and the religious leaders are looking for ways to attack him by asking him a question or questions that they don't think he'll be able to answer. Verse 18, Jesus was approached by some Sadducees, religious leaders who say there is no resurrection from the dead. They pose this question: Teacher, Moses gave us a law that if a man dies, leaving a wife without children, his brother should marry the widow and have a child who will carry on in the brother's name. Well, suppose there were 7 brothers. The oldest one married and died without children. So the second one married the widow. He also died without children. Then the third brother married her, and this continued with all 7. Still there were no children. Last of all, the woman also died. So tell us, whose wife will she be in the resurrection? All 7 were married to her. The Sadducees kind of set back at this point, smug, content that they have asked Jesus the question that he won't be able to answer. Well, Jesus answers. Verse 24, your mistake is that you don't know the scriptures. You don't know the power of God. When the dead rise, they won't marry or be given in marriage. In this respect, they'll be like the angels in heaven. Jesus responds and says, your problem is you haven't taken time to look at Scripture. You haven't seen that in the afterlife, things will be different. Everything will be different. We're not going to marry. We're not going to be given in marriage. Your premise is all wrong. Then, regarding the Sadducees, Jesus goes on the attack. Verse 26. But now, as to whether the dead will be raised, haven't you ever read about this in the writings of Moses? In the story of the burning bush, long after Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob had died, God said to Moses, I am the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. So he's the God of the living, not the dead. You've made a serious error. Jesus says God continually refers to himself as the God of Abraham. He also calls himself the God of the living. He's not the God of the dead. Abraham then must be alive. He must be somewhere in a resurrected body. And the Sadducees are dead wrong. Now, we will rise from the dead, Jesus says. And he comes back later, just a little bit later here in the book of Mark, and he talks a little bit more about that. But when he does, it's very interesting. When I grew up, I had this concept that when we died, we all went to heaven to live in the clouds. That is not scriptural. What is scriptural is that we will be resurrected. Then in the book of Revelation, chapters 21 and 22, just listen to some of the thing that John tells us. Revelation chapter 21, verse 1, I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the old heaven and the old earth had disappeared, and the sea also was gone. I saw the holy city, a new Jerusalem, coming down from God out of heaven, like a bride beautifully dressed for her husband. I heard a loud shout from the throne saying, "Look, God's home is now among his people. He will live with them and they will be his people. God himself will be with them." So here in the first 3 verses, John tells us that God makes a new heaven and a new earth, and he lives in that new heaven and that new earth with his people. Later on, same chapter, verse 24, the nations will walk in the light of the new city. The kings of the world will enter the city in all their glory. Its gates will never be closed at the end of the day because there is no night there. All the nations will bring their glory and honor into this city. Nothing evil will be allowed to enter, nor anyone who practices idolatry or dishonesty. Only those whose names are written in the Lamb's book of life. Then in chapter 22, verse 14, we read this. Blessed are those who wash their robes. They'll be permitted to enter through the gates of the city and eat the fruit from the tree of life. Neither Jesus nor Paul nor John are super clear on what happens, but what is clear is that our bodies are raised from the dead. We're given new bodies to live in the new heaven and the new earth. We dwell with God. We eat of the tree of life that God created for Adam and Eve back at the very beginning. Everything comes full circle, and we apparently enter a new Eden where perhaps our role will be to till the ground, to protect the ground, to do what Adam and Eve were originally called to do. We will be raised, and we will live in a new heaven and a new earth with God forever. Please like, follow, and subscribe on whatever platform you use to listen to this podcast. Do you have questions for us? Email us at questions@becomehope.com. Tomorrow, we'll talk about the most important commandment